Welcome to Design As, a show that's intended to speculate on the future of design from a range of different perspectives. This season, we're bringing you 6 new episodes with 6 new keywords to interrogate. In this episode, you'll be hearing 3 different design voices speak to the idea of design as pluriverse. I'm Lee Moreau, host of the Futures Archive from Design Observer, founding director of Other Tomorrows, and professor of practice in design at Northeastern University's College of Arts, Media, and Design, which hosted the 2024 Design Research Society Conference earlier this year. There, I got the chance to sit down with various guests, leaders, and speakers who are attending the conference, and we've compiled some of their voices in this episode about design as pluriverse. This is a roundtable in 3 parts. On this episode, you'll hear from Renata Marquez Leitao.
Sometimes it's very difficult to separate what is real help and what is simply oppression.
Frederick Van Amstel.
While we make this, we also remake ourselves. So we understand that people are never totally made. People are never done. And they can be also considered design projects in themselves.
And Leslie Ann Noel.
Anybody who feels a little bit othered I find that they have found this conversation of a world of many worlds resonates with them because it kind of gives them space to say, okay, I can exist as I am because maybe I occupy this other world, and we just learn to talk with each other.
Pluriversal design, or the notion that design is itself a pluriverse or a world of many worlds, has sort of been in some ways dominating conversation about the future of design for the last couple of years, and it had a really big presence at the Design Research Society conference here this year. It had its own track, many speakers, probably some of the most enthusiastic conversations were on this topic. And I think this idea that there can be at any one given time multiple intersecting, beautiful, in some cases conflicting worlds in which design both occupies, operates, and works is a really powerful concept that is driving where design is heading. And I was very excited to talk to these amazing leaders, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. I'm here with Renata Marquez Leitao at Northeastern's recording studio. It's June 24th. Hi, Renata. How are you?
I'm good.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi. So I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Human-Centered Design at Cornell University. And I'm also convener of the Pluriversal Design SIG of the Design Research Society. That is a research network that connects people who are interested in pluriversal design, in the pluriverse, in expanding our understanding of the world, and also changing how the world operates.
And how long have you been doing that?
I've been doing that for 5 years.
Okay. And I ask because the pluriversal design has really kind of gotten people's attention in that 5-year range, but it goes back further, right?
I think this is something that we started to talk about more and more about the pluriverse in 2017.
Okay.
That was like the date when Arturo Escobar started to connect his work with design. I think that's the point when we started to talk about the pluriverse.
And how has that affected your career trajectory? That was about 8 years ago or something.
Yes, I think that because I'm Brazilian, I'm originally from Brazil, and I had the chance of spending a lot of time when I was young, when I was about 11 to 14 years old, in a native village. So I have been working with indigenous people for a long time. So many times when I was doing this kind of project, this kind of collaboration with indigenous people in North America, my colleagues still had those ideas that helping. It doesn't matter how much you change the language, you say that you're designing with instead of designing for, but you still have the same mindset of correcting a problem that they have. And I think that because I had my experience back in Brazil, I understood how creative and innovative the communities can be.
Mhm.
So just the role of the designer should be completely different. So when I got to know Arturo Escobar's work, I felt validated. I felt, okay, all the things that I've been proposing for years.
Yeah.
Suddenly I recognize myself. Suddenly I see someone that is very knowledgeable who are writing exactly about the same things. So for me, it was kind of a meeting with myself when I found his work.
But this notion of helping, I'm using air quotes here, right? Helping
Uh-huh.
on its face, that sounds like a very noble thing, but break that down for us.
But-
Where's the problem?
First, I have to say that the sentence that we should always think about is the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Mhm.
That's the first thing. Second, everything about colonialism had the good intentions. It was about converting, saving, like you had to convert it into Christianity to save people's souls. So all the violence and the exploitation, centuries of violence and exploitation, had always had this facade of help. So sometimes it's very difficult to separate what is real help and what is simply oppression.
Mhm.
That is it's very important to understand where is the line between the two.
And how do you start to work with your students to articulate that line and to kind of pull those things apart?
Yes, because I think that we have to start to identify what I name theories of change, how change happens. What are our assumptions about how change happens? And what's the final result? What do you want to produce? What is the pathway towards change? So, and then our partners, they also have their theories of change. They also have their pathways. And you can't really imagine that your pathway, just because you are a very educated person, is better than their pathway. So it's a lot about recognizing our assumptions, especially assumptions about how change happens.
And as you've been doing this over time, has it become easier to articulate this to students, or are you still finding that you're kind of having the same conversation over and over? Like, meaning, has the discipline moved in such a way that it's kind of catching up with some of your ideas, or are you still maybe carving a new path?
I think that both, both in different levels. I think that people now are much more aware of several levels of oppression, but there are many things that are still very invisible. And when I say invisible, I say particularly native, indigenous, local people that many people think, oh, they are very far from me. I have nothing to do with them. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. We have all those computers. Where do you think the metals, the gold that we...
All the battery stuff.
Everything. Everything. Where do you think it comes from? The clothes that you wear. Where do you think it comes from? Where do you think it ends up? You are connected with people who are invisible all the time. So this layer of invisibility, I think people are still not there. Still not there. Because to see, to understand those communities, to see, acknowledge who they are, I almost think that people need correcting glasses. And those correcting glasses is pluriversal theory. You have to, it's very theoretical to understand how our mind tricks us to not see. So many times how we, like paradigm, how we understand that the world works really makes certain aspects of reality completely invisible. So you need a little bit of theory to be able to see.
And Renata, you're leading an entire track, I think, here at the conference. What are you hoping to get out of that track? Are you trying to maybe demonstrate or bring some young people and students into this conversation?
Absolutely. And the name of the track is Pluriversal Design as a Paradigm. Yes, paradigm is a word that is very important. And I really see it as there are two paradigms in design, the universal and the pluriversal. And for me, it's very important to say, I'm not saying one is best and like one is right and one is wrong. No, Both are important, but they create different, like the goals are different. The theories of change are different. What you're trying to accomplish is different. So when I'm trying to make people understand that it's not because you're talking about diversity, plurality, inclusivity, that you're talking about pluriversality.
Mm-hmm.
You can talk about diversity, plurality, inclusivity
I see. Okay.
within the universal paradigm or the pluriversal paradigm. That was the intention of creating this track, to understand that, okay, there are two different paradigms. Both are essential. Both are super important, but they operate in a different way.
Can you articulate for our listeners that shift from universal design to pluriversal design and how disruptive you hope this, can be?
Yes, universal. And especially because when you think about universal, you think about design. Because I think design is about idealism. It's about improving. It's about making life better.
Sounds wonderful. Yeah.
Wonderful, but it's based on one idea of how the world works that is like Eurocentric or modern or developed or whatever. It's one idea of how society works. And then universal is the idea that it should work for everyone. It should work for everyone. Everybody should be able to have a good job, able to have a house. And I agree. That's great. There is nothing wrong with this universal for the people who live within the society. But then you talk about 80% of the world that doesn't live within the society. Right. So we are not trying to make them work within the same system. You have to learn to respect them, the way their world works. And because now it's impossible for them to thrive, to flourish. So every time that we talk about pluriverse, is talking about different ways to flourish. So it's not different flowers, different plants, but the idea that design should be universal. We should cater for everyone. Everybody should wear the same clothes, use the same products. Then you don't respect the different pathways towards flourishing. So that's the difference.
That's fantastic. Renata, tell me how all of this connects to your lab at Cornell. And by the way, how does that connect to this pluriversal model, this idea of flourishing? Because I think, bringing those things together.
So my lab at Cornell is pluriversal futures. That is just because I like different ways to flourish, different pathways to flourishing. And now I'm collaborating with a few communities in the Amazon forest because I really think that the future of humanity relies on the tropical forests. We need to have the tropical forests as intact as possible because they are carbon sinks, and if they are degraded, they become carbon sources, like gigantic, ginormous carbon sources. So the integrity of the forests,
which is happening.
Yes, it's happening. Yeah. It's happening. The thing is that you go to the forests are not just the trees, are social systems because there are people living there. And now in this universal paradigm, you think that there are just two ways. The ways are either indigenous or the modern. But the reality is that there are many populations that are in between, but they don't have pathways to create a good life, to flourish. So that's what I'm investigating. How can we support local communities who are not purely indigenous and they are not urban to flourish? Because if we don't find ways to support them, we are doomed because the forest is going to be degraded. That's something. So that's why I think that pluriversal futures go together. Because if we don't support people who are in the tropical forests, there is no future for anyone. It's not for them. You're not. I just say, why should you be worried about the communities of the forest? Not because of them, just because you're ethical. I say we should care about them because we are selfish. That's it.
So Ithaca, New York is a long, long way from the Amazon.
Yes.
How do you bring these two worlds together?
Zoom. WhatsApp.
Okay.
Yeah, Zoom.
I mean, it's a challenge, though, clearly. I mean, it doesn't happen automatically.
Doesn't happen automatically. So that's why it's important to have very strong friendships and partnerships. Because I'm not going to be there. I'm not going to be there. The people who are really leading the project are people who live there. And I think that it's good that it's like this, because I'm basically part of this to pay them salaries and give them some money to do the work. I think that I just created a situation, a pretext, so they can do the kind of work that they would love to do anyways.
In this notion of pluriversal futures, I've got to ask, like, what's on your mind right now related to the future of design?
I'm a passionate designer. I adore our profession. Our discipline. I think it's a very important way of thinking about reality. We put together a theory and practice. So I really believe that's becoming more and more important, making closer collaboration with other disciplines, because we are able to get anthropology and we are able to get the methods to intervene, to be there. So I think the future of design is the future of change, of transformation, of creating new futures. For me, that's the future of design.
I'm hearing hope, too.
Hope, designing hope. Yes, yes. How can we have hope without design? For me, that's the discipline of hope.
Renata, it was wonderful spending time with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
We're currently here at Harvard's Seas building at Harvard University's campus, and I'm here with Frederick Van Amstel, who most of our listeners probably know from his appearance on one of our shows and also from all the amazing work that he's done. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too.
So, Frederick, for our listeners, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I previously worked at Brazil at Federal University of Technology, Paraná, publicly funded university that had a lot of student quota for low-income students, Black students, women, and people that were, as we say, oppressed. And I was doing their important role of trying to make sense of how design can be useful for these people, because they usually don't take courses in design because they believe to their communities this is just producing luxurious services and products that they will never be able to afford. And then we founded this Laboratory of Design Against Oppression, LADO, and we started to develop projects, design projects with communities of oppressed people. And those projects were nothing like luxurious services and products. And our students started to pour in and become interested on the social responsibility of design. So how can design actually be part of this uplifting process that Brazil as a developing nation is going through? And that attracted the attention of people in the US because apparently...
Like us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So the US presented me, actually the University of Florida gave me the opportunity to try these things here and check whether design can be part of this process of uplifting, of developing further and having more equality or equity and other kinds of qualities that we lack in these unequal societies where things are separated from each other, fragmented. And we see design, actually we practice, not just see, design as a means to connect people, have hard conversations while they make something. And that making is progressed towards the point that it can be manufactured or it can be reproduced in a larger scale, like a service that has been designed. That's some examples of things that come out of this process.
How's the transition been so far?
Yeah, it's amazing how design is actually conceived and practiced differently in each nation and sometimes even within the same nation. For example, with this short trip that I just have done here, all the way from Florida to Massachusetts, I can already spot that there are different currents of what design means in this nation, which is also very interesting because it should be like that.
So do you see a particular mission or mandate for you in this new role?
This new role is about, first of all, to make sense of this multicultural formation of the United States and the ways how this has kept people apart from each other. So basically, I'm still learning about it, but it seems like the US tries to create spaces and positions and roles for people that come from different cultures so that everyone feels included, but at the same time, everyone feels excluded from the other groups. And especially after noticing hierarchies, because some groups, some spaces have better resources, more accumulated things at hand, I started to question that through design. Can we actually create situations where we speculate about futures, where we actually create transitional strategies or services that can help us move towards a society where these resources are more distributed? And that always brings me back to how I started this, because US has been very influential on my own upbringing with this concept of free software or open source software, as you prefer to use here. But I know that there's a difference because I learned from countercultural people from California, but other places, New York. They were always inspiring me at the beginning of my career to study design as a means to overcome oppression. They would say design, or in their case, free software, should support people in their freedom. So they should use technology in the way they would need, especially to help someone else who's in the need. And at some point, I started to think about, well, can we design for freedom? And then philosophy also came up, because what is freedom? In the US, for example, there's this concept of freedom is being yourself and not being forced to behave and to say things that you are not truthful to your inner being. However, where I come from in Brazil, when we speak about freedom, it's more about what we can do. And if we lack freedom, it's always we lacking freedom.
Right.
And we don't talk so much about individual freedom. And I think design has this marvelous opportunity to make this all tangible. So we are talking about different philosophies of making our worlds that are embedding the concept of individual freedom, and how exactly, which kind of mechanisms. And in design, I was always wondering, what is our design code? What is the kind of contribution we give back to society? And I started to figure out, and you helped me so much in that podcast, that conversation, design is culture.
Yes.
It's culture production, and our code is cultural code. However, it's not like other cultural production activities where most of the contributions are consolidated in language. You could say that design has some language, but I believe there's a lot of materiality that goes beyond language. For example, all these tactile properties of stuff around us. These are all design features that we copy and we adapt and we change over and over through our cultural interchange. And that's why US is really a very important place to be if you want to learn and develop further design, because of this multicultural formation. We can see so many traditions of materialities and how we shape worlds. However, sometimes some worlds, they're not very respectful to other worlds, and they use those materialities against other worlds to coexist.
So the materials are used to oppress others, to reinforce separation,
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the classic example is hostile architecture that we can see, for example, in big urban environments. They have these benches that you cannot sleep on them, or you have places where animals cannot share spaces with humans, and all of these kind of divisive mechanisms to keep people apart without having a sound or democratic basis. This is not something that a collective would like to. For example, like traffic lights. Collectively, democratically, we want that division, because
we all appreciate that system.
We appreciate that materiality, and it's not exclusive. Actually, it's excluding people who wants to overuse it for their own individuality. And again, we are coming back to this contradiction, and I love this word, trying always to mend between opposite and extreme ways of doing design. This has also been a very important motto of my design research activity. For example, individual freedom versus collective freedom. And I see design as being this mediation. Sometimes we put more weight on individual freedom, other times on collective freedom, but we can never design anything completely on the extremes. And it's no longer design.
You're very busy, it's clear.
Yes.
Tell me more about some of this design research that you've been engaging in and how that is influenced by this pluriversal model of design.
Yeah. I think one of the most important things is that design research does not aim to only make products. Design research is this short circuit in the way we think about science being done in the labs and technology development or engineering done in everyday life or outside of the lab or in companies. Design research is trying to bridge this gap and making and thinking being part of the same thing. So when we start delving to design research, we realize, okay, make theories. That's a motto, because theories, these concepts, they are quickly transformed into artifacts, but the artifacts do not realize everything that they can be, because from one theory you can create multiple artifacts, a series of styles. We can have an entire stream of design research and change in society out of that. For example, modernism. Think about how many different things have been built out of this concept. And it has to be made somewhere, right? So nowadays, for example, we are crafting this theory of pluriversality. And you probably had, as a host, a lot of people are also making this new way of understanding how we make ourselves part of a world that can fit many worlds. And that has been a very growing topic in this design research society community. There is this special interest group led by Renata Leitão and Leslie-Ann Noel. They have done a marvelous job, but this discussion is overflowing to other special interest groups, to other people who are also concerned about how can we handle this democratic challenge that we are currently facing. Pluriverse is one of the answers that the design research community have focused on. They didn't invent the term. They are drawing from other areas. But what is unique from the pluriversal design approach that is emerging now, that we are making together, is that we're not reducing language and discourses and public speeches, but we also making the stuff that these worlds are made of. And while we make this, we also remake ourselves. So we understand that people are never totally made. People are never done, and they can be also considered design projects in themselves.
That's beautiful and extraordinarily hopeful.
Imagine that.
Yes.
And it's not just about individual being, but collective beings. What kind of being do we need to make out of ourselves to collectively exist when differences are positive and not negative? And that's very different from ideas like multiculturalism, old-fashioned in the United States with these all ghettos and separate. The pluriverse is not like each world is separate. It's not the same as multiple worlds. It's a world, one world that can fit many worlds. And you say, how one can fit many? That's the contradiction that animates this democratic endeavor. And it's a new kind of democracy, because it's in this democracy, we can never refer to some kind of fixed one-size-fits-all universal set of values. So we cannot say, well, American culture is this, and any kind of conflict that we cannot solve will be solved by American culture values.
So it eliminates that conversation entirely.
Yeah, because America is supposed to be the pluriverse in this concept.
In principle,
America should be the pluriverse where many worlds can fit. And therefore, America should be able to mediate. And that's also a design challenge, I would say, between those different disputing, computing, but also complementing worldviews and practice and materialities. And why not? Bodies, beings, ways of dressing, ways of talking, and all of this diversity that comes out of this is not something that we should think about to be imposed. Like the pluriverse is different, for example, of discussions about how can we turn our policies to be more inclusive or more diversifying or this and that, because the pluriverse is not a prescription. Doesn't tell what you should do. It's actually invite you to make what the pluriverse is about while being part of it. And we start from the ground, from the basic premise that we are already there. We just need to make it better. We just need to make better for whom, for what, in which way.
And that's where design comes in. So on that hopeful note, When you think about the future, what do you see? Whether that's in your academic role or just as you look out into the vision of this pluriversal notion actually taking hold, where people actually understand that it's there and adopt it and feel comfortable there.
I think the biggest challenge right now is to think about what's the difference between a pluriverse where everything is welcomed and a pluriverse where certain things which are detrimental of the pluriverse itself should not be allowed. So how do we create mechanisms or tools or services or whatever you want to call it, a data processing, whatever, AI, could they help with this challenge of people who comes and use democratic grounds to destroy democracy?
So you're suggesting there must be rules of the pluriverse the same way there are traffic rules that you talked
Maybe
about
they
earlier.
are not rules. In design, we also have other ways of guiding people and steering people, especially like in the persuasive behavior steering design in sustainability. Why not we can think about steering people towards more democratic ways of conviviality, of living with your neighbors, living with different people on the internet. I think that's the next challenge. How do we make those utopias an actual reality? As the greatest Brazilian musician Gilberto Gil said once, we should have not a utopia, we should have a usopia. So we should use those ideas
Usopia.
right now. Usopia.
That you engage, that is material, that is lived.
It's lived. And I think the pluriverse is an usopia that we are living right now. Every dialogue in this intercultural exchange that produces an objectual result, which is this podcast episode, which is a design product too.
Yes. This is our product for today. Frederick Van Amstel, thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a great rest of your conference. I know you're very busy, but thank you for taking time.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. It was great talking.
Design As is a podcast from Design Observer. Check out another one of the podcasts from Design Observer, The Design of Business, The Business of Design, which is back for its 12th season this year.
DBBD is going into its 12th season. My goodness, it seems like a lifetime. We have a wonderful sponsor in Deloitte that has given us a lot of leeway to dig in, do some excellent reporting. I'm going to be a solo host this year, which is going to be new for me, but it gives me time to get more guests on the air. And we're very much focused on the heady business of equity. And I know that this is a word that's not in favor at the moment, that there's lots of conversations about race and justice and inclusion and diversity, which I think is really a distraction from the bigger job of what business should be. So we're really focusing on the people who are redesigning business for equity and how that can work and where it can be hopeful and joyful work as well.
You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're at Harvard University right now, and I'm here with Leslie and Noel. Hi, Leslie.
Hi, Lee. It's so great to be here next to you in person and not looking at you in a little box on Zoom.
No, you are a familiar voice to a lot of our listeners on the Futures Archive and at Design Observer. You've been on my podcast several times. It's great to have you back. Dr. Leslie Ann Noel is a designer, researcher, and educator. She's the new dean of the Faculty of Design at OCAD in Toronto. She's also the co-founder and co-chair of the Pluriversal Design Special Interest Group here at the Design Research Society. And she's the author of Design Social Change, which is a recent publication from Stanford's D School. What are you most excited about here at the conference in particular?
Yeah, for me, I think what I'm really excited about is I think that there are some discussions that I started having with a colleague. I co-chair a special interest group within the DRS. And I think our discussions in 2018 were very fringe. And it's just interesting to see in 2024 how what we are interested in, which is designs from others. That's a terrible way of describing it, but it's like that, right? What we are interested in has moved more and more and more into either into the mainstream or into other conversations. So I almost can't keep track of the conversations where people are talking about pluriversality, or it was a little fringe movement that is now coming into the mainstream.
It doesn't feel niche to me anymore.
No.
If it once did, it does not at this point. It feels actually very central to this, particularly this conference. I feel like 20% of the content is kind of leaning in that direction, right? So
when people start to talk about things like resistance and reflection, and that becomes very tied to the way that we talk all the time. And so that's been exciting to move from the fringe into the main conversation. And it's also been exciting because I've been coming to this conference for a little while. It's interesting to see how all of us who were junior people have kind of moved up in the conference space. And actually, yesterday I spoke with somebody who I considered very senior, and she noted that as well. She said, "Oh, wow, all of these junior people are moving up professionally, moving up academically. We're writing solid research. We're not these baby researchers anymore." So that's been exciting too, to see people grow.
There's also a lot going on when you start to acknowledge and recognize that sort of transition taking place, right? It means that there's certain leaders making space, people rising up, people who are sort of establishing their work in a way with new audiences and things like that. So here at the conference, this is a place where a lot of conversations about what's happening in academia take place. What's happening in your world?
So, conference-wise, I'll bring him first to the conference. So I'm here, as I said earlier, I co-chair the Pluriversal Design Special Interest Group, and I also work with a group of people slightly outside of the Special Interest Group around pluriversality. So it's a group of about 25 people, and then 6 of us will come together for a project, and then we'll move apart, and then another 6 will come. And so 7 of us, I think, we did a workshop yesterday that was tremendous. It was so successful. A 4-hour workshop on pluriversal ways of knowing, making, and engaging. And 4 hours is a long time, and people stayed till the end, and they were just excited about thinking about bringing new perspectives into their work as designers or design educators. And then the other work I'm doing in the conference is we have a track around pluriversal design. So there are 2 sessions that I'll be chairing.
It's interesting as you tell this story because, 3-4 years ago when we started talking, you were using sort of techniques and mechanisms to enter conversations around pluriversality, right? Talking about recipes, talking about, right? So there were kind of ways to allow people to access or engage who might be unfamiliar.
Yes.
You don't have to do that now. In some sense, it's a platform.
Yes. A colleague of mine who works in a state where equity is becoming very policed actually said that a strategy to continue to have this conversation is around pluriversality and globalization. And so it's become another way to have conversations that maybe the state might be policing.
Yeah. It's being acknowledged in some sense. So part of the uptake or the utilization is probably not the right word, but the kind of adoption is a signal that something's working, right?
Yes, it's working. People can talk about a world of many worlds regardless of their interests. Now, there's a core theory, of course, and a core group of people that this theory was written around, but it resonates with a lot of groups, and including, people of color, people from other geographic locations, people with other gender identities, anybody who feels a little bit othered. I find that they have found this conversation of a world of many worlds resonates with them because it kind of gives them space to say, okay, I can exist as I am because maybe I occupy this other world, and we just learn to talk with each other.
Leslie, and this is all really exciting stuff. When you think about the future of design, looking out at the horizon and maybe beyond, what do you see? What excites you? Maybe what makes you nervous? What's out there?
What could make me nervous, could make a lot of people nervous, is just how much change is coming. I co-wrote or was part of a series with a few colleagues of mine where we talked about existential crises. And I think that there is more existential crisis coming for designers in the future, because as we ask all of these new questions, some of the, one big question is, okay, so what's our role? What do we do anymore? And I think a lot of us will spend a lot of time reflecting on redefining what work we do. And some of that new work won't look like design. And that might be frightening for some of us because design is so tied to our identity. And I think I've experienced that where some days I'm like, okay, what do I design anymore? But I'm still designing. I'm designing all the time. And so I think that could be something that's frightening coming for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, though, that I think is exciting is how bold people are becoming in their practice. So I, of course, work with people interested in pluriversality. So I'm always reading papers from people who would traditionally be considered on the fringe of design research. And as I read these papers over time, I am impressed by, again, how bold they've become in writing about their design practice more confidently. So like we have Indian authors writing more about Jugaad as a clear design practice that they say is not tied to any other design way of thinking. Or I think we have a paper about Senegalese design history, which who would have written that before? And so I think that that's exciting for me in particular to see people from all of these different places with really different design principles or design philosophies writing about their work and knowing that their work is good enough, because maybe 25 years ago we would have still been doing this work, but we maybe would have had a little imposter syndrome where we're like, okay, who really thinks this is design? And actually, I'm going to quote one of my colleagues, Nee Botchway, in South Africa over the weekend when we were preparing for the workshop. He said, there are no imposters in the pluriverse because we all respect each other's knowledge. So none of us are coming in with any imposter syndrome. And I think that's kind of
beautiful.
Like, isn't it fantastic? And I think that's, to me, what's exciting, that a lot of us who might have had imposter syndrome might lose that imposter syndrome and write more and share our work more confidently in the future.
That's amazing. Leslie Ann, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Renata Marquez-Letao, Frederick von Emstel, and Leslie Ann Noel for taking the time to sit down with me. Design As is a podcast from Design Observer. For a transcript and show notes, you can visit our website at designobserver.com/designaz. You can always find Design As on any podcatcher of your choice. And if you like this episode, please let us know. Write us a review, share it with a friend, and keep up with us on social media at Design Observer. We'd love to give you a seat at our roundtable however we can. Special thanks to Maxine Philivong at the Northeastern Recording Studio and Design Observer's editor-in-chief, Ellen McGirt. This episode was mixed by Judy Bell Kamanian. Design As is produced by Adina Karp.